Welcome to my presentation on the topic of high school students responding to characters' language and actions for reflecting on acting their own trusting relations. In this presentation, I'll talk about a study we did on this topic. In responding to characters' actions, students are enacting trusting relations. They are also drawing on their experiences of enacting these trusting relations in their own lives. And that leads them to assessing their trust based on others' ways of being truthful in their interactions. A lot of the research shows that adolescents lack a certain sense of trust in others, particularly in terms of trust in the media. 60% of young adults indicate that most people just, quote, can't be trusted. And 73% of people just, quote, look out for themselves. Languaging theory that I'm drawing on for this study talks about this topic of how people use language as actions for enacting their relations with others. The meaning of this language lies in the in-between, in their interactions, not in the solo identities, but in their interactions. Determining trust in these interactions is really based on others' languaging actions, considering how others are responding, how they're being consistent or truthful, how they're adhering to certain shared norms, and how they're voicing emotions of care and support for others. Students also are reflecting on their languaging actions as they enact certain trusting relations. This leads to the notion that it's really a valuable process for having students explicitly reflect on characters' languaging actions in responding to literature. This includes also inferring connections to their own languaging actions and recognizing the value of the use of these actions for enacting trust and growth over time in terms of their own relations. The questions I address in this study include: what types of languaging actions do students infer related to characters in the novel Lord of Flies and the novel 1984 for enacting trust versus mistrust in their relations with other characters? I also address the question of how did students infer connections between their responses to these types of characters' languaging actions for enacting trusting relations, to then reflect on their own use of languaging to enact trusting relations, as well as their relations based on distrust. In this study, I examined 48 12th grade students who enrolled in 3 sections of an English course taught by Ms. E in an upper Midwest high school. Of these students, 36 of them identified as white, 3 as Asian Americans, 7 as Black, and 3 are Latinx. The students responded to 5 reflection prompts from the teacher on an Excel sheet in their response to the 2 novels. I then examined these responses categorized based on the types of languaging actions characters are employing for enacting both a lack of trust as well as an action of trust in these characters and in their own relations. So the first type had to do with languaging for enacting lack of shared realities or truth evident in responses to Lord of the Flies. For example, Kathy indicated that Ralph in the novel is not happy that Jack has let the fire go out. So Ralph tries to tell Jack that the meat is not their highest priority and getting rescued is. She also notes Ralph's concern about this in that Ralph's trust in Jack starts to diminish at this point and their relationship worsens. In response to Ralph's distrust for her own peers, she noted that if they're interacting with their own peers, they're not doing the thing they're supposed to do. So these reactions serve to limit my trust in them. In response to 1984, Students also noted how languaging resulted in a lack of shared realities or trust. For example, Sandra indicated that the characters in 1984 would just be willing to turn on each other to save themselves, so I feel like there's no trust between anybody. In her own life, she noted her lack of trust in people. They feel like they can't tell me something directly, and I end up finding out something else, like from someone that wasn't them. Students also noted languaging having to do with the use of inconsistent languaging. For example, Carol, in response to Lord of the Flies, noted that Jack failed his commitment to not let the signal fire go out, resulting in Ralph's loss of trust in Jack. In her own relations, she talked about the problem working with a peer when they, quote, don't follow through and do the thing they're supposed to do. Their reaction serves to limit my trust in them. In response to 1984, Steve noted that O'Brien's duplicitous actions were driven by his deceitful purpose in trying to test people's loyalty. He then noted in his own life, when I meet someone and they talk like they don't know what they're doing, I'm more likely then to maybe trust them. Students also noted languaging having to do with negative positioning of others. For example, in Lord of the Flies, one student noted how Jack's calling Piggy fatty, and he noted people would not say those names to me. It would affect me quite a lot and make me sad. It would limit my trust in them because how could you trust someone if they called you names? Betsy, in response to 1984, noted that Winston and Julie end up betraying each other at the end, but they are the most trustworthy characters in the novel. And she noted in her own relations of peers and relations, labeling and excluding her boyfriend as, quote, people I thought I could trust to all support me no matter what made them some pretty harsh comments, so I lost little trust in them. Students also noted how languaging relations occurs through languaging emotions. So for example, Larry responded to how Ralph and Piggy, when they first met, they experienced a sense of uncertainty about their relation, since they, quote, don't know if they should trust each other at this point. And he noted similarly in meeting a girl and not knowing, quote, whether I could trust her or not. Very quickly, I came to trust this girl and want to become closer with her. Katie, in response to 1984, talked about Winston writing his journal in that quote, he does not even trust himself because he didn't realize what he was even writing. And in her own relations, she talked about going fishing with her brother so that it is, quote, limited his trust since he couldn't believe whether I liked something or not. Students, on the other hand, talked about languaging for supporting relation in a more positive way. For example, John noted that Simon helped Piggy in ways that shows that Simon is a caring person and a sort of parent to some of the boys. And he noted that when he was being bullied by a peer, the action of my friend telling the bully to stop helped me trust them more because it showed me that it was someone who, quote, had my back and someone I could trust. William noted the trust between Winston and Julie's willingness to challenge Big Brother was similar to his own experience of staying out with his girlfriend after their parents' curfew deadline to, quote, spend more time with my girlfriend. Our relations and our trust with each other grew because of the risks we both took to one another. Students also noted languaging as sharing alternative perspectives. For example, Alan noted how Ralph and Jack adopted conflicting perspective, who, quote, shouldn't have talked about these issues as opposed to jumping straight to murder. And he noted in his own experience in ordering apparel for his hockey team, quote, we talked it out, found apparel we were content with. It helped to solidify the fact we're still good friends who can communicate and talk things through because we already have a lot of trust in each other. And Laura responded to Winston's distrust as derived from others not understanding his perspective on the truth about Big Brother. And she noted in terms of her own life, the importance of others understanding what you're saying and that they can understand where you're coming from, even if they hadn't necessarily been in the same situation. They can understand your thinking and you can understand their thinking. So in summary, these students were inferring what characters were saying, not what they were saying, versus what they were really saying, responding to what characters are doing in their languaging actions. And they also thought about how trust was based on an ethical I-thou relations rather than the more impersonal, institutional I-it control of others. They also noted the need to focus on the in-between meanings for enacting these relations. So I think this is an important notion in terms of the idea of thinking about what we mean by self-assessing, where self-assessing on the one hand is often viewed as an individualistic conforming to formless teacher criteria related to achievement, versus self-assessing about one's ability to employ languaging actions for enacting relations with others based on a relational learning model. How would then one assess these students' responses? Teachers could look at the specificity in how students are identifying characters' languaging actions related to making connections to their own lived world trusting relations. They could also look at the relevancy of the connections they make between their responses to characters and their related lived world actions. And they could look at the perceptiveness and insightfulness about how they were inferring these language actions related to enacting trusting relations. Now, Miss E also thought about how she could have students think about the responses to these novels, as well as how they could think about responding in their own other writing, in this case, a mini ethnography about their languaging, in which she had them analyze how group or party members talk and communicate through language used, their speech, discourse, diction, jargon, slang, nicknames, greetings, and salutations. And this led to them thinking about the purpose for their use of languaging in terms of how they operate in a certain group. Students could also reflect on changes in their languaging action over time by collecting responses and narrative writing or even transcripts discussion to think about changes in their languaging over time. And they could then reflect on how these changes related to changes in their relations with others. So I want to thank you for this presentation, listening to this presentation.